In October of 1347, the people of Sicily were met with a chilling sight at the harbor. 12 nameless ships from the Black Sea had arrived and docked. No one knew their purpose, and as the locals gathered to investigate the silence, they encountered a scene they would never forget. It was a fleet of ghost ships. Almost all the sailors had perished, with the living gazing at death itself, their bodies covered in bruises, swellings, and blood and pus-filled sores. The local authorities later pushed these ships back to sea, but it was too late. In fact, everything had started even before the ships had docked. As many at the time speculated, God's punishment had begun. Since the time of the Roman legions stationed around the world, bodies with blackish blotches and putrefaction had begun to emerge. No one knew where it came from or how to deal with it. What they did know was that anyone who caught it would die. With the expansion of the Western Roman Empire, merchants traveled everywhere, docking at the most prosperous city for trade, Constantinople. And as the blackish blotches began to touch the sailors' hands, the Black Storm enveloped all of Europe. From 541 to 549, nearly 5,000 people died each day, with death rates in cities reaching 40%. With a dwindling population and depleted treasury, the Roman Empire entered its twilight days. But this was just humanity's first encounter with the blackened hands, the decaying toes, and the pus-filled blotches. After decimating the Roman Empire, the nightmare went to sleep, leaving its seeds scattered across the world, waiting for perfect conditions to return. From 1346 to 1353, the bruises, swellings, and blotchy sores traveled the world, from Asia, Europe, the Middle East, to North Africa. The rumors that this was God's punishment were not entirely unfounded. The vast spread of this suffering could not have occurred if the times had not allowed it. And that time, one might say, was the perfect condition. During ancient Roman times, the temperature was relatively high. But then the Dark Age cold period arrived, ending the warm period around 400 AD. The world then experienced a strange warm period known as the medieval warm period. The warmth brought perfect conditions for trade and a population boom. Seaports opened everywhere, untouched lands were cultivated for trade, homes sprang up like mushrooms, and humanity took its first steps towards global commerce. In 1266, Genoese moved to Kaffa to expand and open up maritime trade. Within a few years, Kaffa became a huge trading center with a population of 80,000 and a daily traffic of 200 merchant ships docking. Kaffa was an economic hub due to its perfect geography. Surrounded by the sea, ports open everywhere with paths leading to the northern Silk Road and river entrances deep into the Asian continent to expand business. From Kaffa, ships traveled everywhere, to Constantinople, the Mediterranean, Italy, and North Africa. An ideal place for economic growth, Kaffa came under the sights of the largest invaders the planet had ever seen, the Mongol army. And without much effort, conflict between the remnants of the 14th century Mongol army and Kaffa was inevitable. But the warfare of humanity was not of concern to Mother Nature. After bestowing upon those little creatures a warm period with bountiful harvests, Mother Earth returned to its winter sleep and welcomed a new period called the Little Ice Age. Perhaps this led many medieval kingdoms into chaos because no one could predict that after the warm days, a cold period would follow. The prolonged winters affected the harvest. Food became a pressing issue in European kingdoms. Meanwhile, with nearly 80 million mouths to feed, the scarce harvests of the Little Ice Age forced every kingdom to bend over backward. Faced with famine, feudal leaders like Edward III of England and Philippe VI of France imposed taxes, leading to social chaos. Things got even worse when all hope for a peaceful period became scarcer. As the harsh weather continued for another 7 years, 10% of Europe's population was lost to famine. Weather, society, everything was terrible. Many left the city walls in search of safer places to live, only to face even worse conditions. A typhoid epidemic swept through Europe, leaving thousands of bodies in crowded capitals. And while food was still scarce, another disease swept through, wiping out European livestock and poultry, making the famine even more severe. Disaster after disaster, it seemed everything was preparing for something even more terrible to happen. Indeed, something was about to happen, but no one could have foreseen how terrible it could be. From 1346, rumors of dead cities began to spread throughout Asia. These were cities without a single soul, all dead from something. What was left were piles of pus-filled, ulcerous corpses everywhere. This was no rumor. In 1200, China's population was 120 million, but by 1393, only 65 million were alive. But China wasn't the only land with traces of a sudden population decline. From the Caspian Sea in Russia to the Korean Peninsula and as far as India, traces of this complete annihilation were everywhere. Something had happened to Asia, but whatever it was, the consequences it left were incredibly unpredictable. Along the Silk Road, traces of ulcers were found everywhere. It seems what happened to the dead cities around Asia had found a way to spread. And to add fuel to the fire, the Mongol horsemen were still scattered across continents from Asia to Europe. Though no longer in their prime, the Mongols were still a formidable force to be reckoned with. They continued to conquer and invade everywhere, despite the rumors of dead cities reaching them. In their conquest of Crimea, specifically the port of Kaffa, the Mongol army realized something was happening to their forces. Soldiers began to show signs of vomiting, bruising, and oozing sores. Within days, those still holding the reins quickly became corpses. While the people of Kaffa were still celebrating God's gift to the invaders, they soon had to taste the bitter fruit. With mountains of decaying bodies each day, the stench from flesh and waste forced the Mongol army to deal quickly with those meat mountains. And while the oozing blotches were still growing like mushrooms, the Mongol army had a truly crazy idea. Loading the corpses of soldiers into catapults, the Mongol army then launched a barrage of smelly, ulcerous bodies into the city. The rain of rotting flesh bombs dropped onto the city, spreading disease-laden innards everywhere. People fell every second, every minute. Wild animals constantly swooped in for the lavish feast laid out before them. Defeated soldiers stole, raped, and burned every living body they saw. Overall, this was hell on earth. The Genoese traders at that time quickly realized the situation and quickly boarded their ships to return home via the Black Sea before they became victims. 12 ships set sail and quickly left Kaffa for home, in Sicily. What happened after the event in Kaffa went down in history as one of the greatest catastrophes ever to befall humanity. The ghost ships that arrived in Sicily brought the oozing sores to Europe, and with the famine and chaos in Europe at the time, death spread even faster than a storm. In May 1347, merchant ships from Kaffa docked in Constantinople, and corpses began to pile up in July at the highest recorded rate of 10,000 deaths per day. From Constantinople, a slave ship brought death to Alexandria, Egypt. From there, the disease moved east to Gaza in April, to Damascus in July, and Aleppo in October. That year, cities like Ashkelon, Acre, Jerusalem, Sidon, and Homs fell into a one-sided battle between disease and humans. Also from Constantinople, trade with the Mediterranean helped the corpses gradually appear en masse by the end of 1347. France's Bruxelles port became the first major epidemic center and quickly spread to Rhône, Lyon, and even to Spain. Spain quickly became a land of death when faced with both paths of death, one from France, one from La Coruna, when the fateful ship from Bordeaux stopped here. Also from Bordeaux, another ship advanced to England in the town of Melcombe Regis. Just 2 years later, England became a huge tomb. From England, France, and neighboring countries, the death ships continued to travel across Europe, bringing the oozing sores and the dead to the Netherlands, Scandinavia, and Norway. The most painful of all was Florence. Before the crops froze, Florence had suffered from drought, floods, war, and everything only got worse when a famine in the cold winter came. Then war returned, and then the black blotches. Looting, starvation, riots, people trampling on people, legs trampling on legs, people dragging each other out of the city to escape the madness happening in the city, only to fall to the black blotches slowly eating away at their bodies. If hell existed, this would be its deepest level. In 1348, the plague was present throughout Europe. Valencia, Barcelona, Rome, Venice, Paris, London are just a few examples. By the end of the summer of 1348, the storm of death had come to Cairo, the capital of the Mamluk Muslim kingdom, the cultural center of the Muslim world, and the largest city in the Mediterranean basin, taking away a third of the population here. The Nile quickly became a river of death with hundreds of thousands of corpses set adrift. Within 2 years, the plague had spread throughout the Muslim world, from Arabia to North Africa. The plague spread westward from Alexandria to the African coast. Even Russia, which had luckily had a shield against the epidemic thanks to banning trade with the Mongols due to religious conflicts, had to surrender before sudden death in 1350. Famine, chaos combined with disease, forced people to constantly move to find a new haven, promoting the spread of death. Many cities became desolate. Many places had a death rate of over 50%. Paris lost 100,000 people. Florence, from 120,000 people, only had 50,000 left. Some villages in the woods no longer had any survivors and were overgrown with time, completely disappearing from humanity. The spread of the disease led to a sharp decline in the global population. The number of deaths is estimated to be about 200 million. The global population at that time was just over 400 million. Why was the storm so severe? We wonder. The answer may lie in ourselves. Where did this disease come from? In short, we are not sure. Since the Roman Empire, the blotches have existed, and over time they hid everywhere and waited for the opportunity to reappear. Many studies suggest that it spread through rats and fleas. Rats are everywhere and nest in particularly damp and dark places, like the holds of ships. And with the conditions of maritime trade in the 14th century, the spread is not surprising. Besides rats and fleas, patients also became a source of infection as their breath also contained death. Direct contact within a close range with the patient will cause the disease to spread more. Meanwhile, many still did not believe this was a disease. They said it was God's punishment for the deserving, and then they also became the deserving. In the chaos of the epidemic, to ensure society still existed, the authorities still promoted trade and exchanged goods, creating more conditions for the epidemic to develop. Besides, the sick died everywhere but were not buried, also becoming huge sources of disease. If those in charge of burial did not die from this disease, they also could not bury hundreds of thousands of people every day because of what was happening. And then the human shadows with bird beaks began to appear. Doctors traveled everywhere, summoned to treat the disease or to learn about it. But with the medical development of the time, treating a disease was not simple. The medical thinking of the 14th century still relied on humorism, believing that the body has 4 types of fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The balance of these 4 fluids will keep the body healthy. Any imbalance will lead to illness. With that thinking, the common treatment of the time was bloodletting, letting blood flow out to find balance for the body. But miraculous cases of healing were rare, while many died quickly due to infection and blood loss. The bird-beaked doctors then had to find other treatments to meet the medical needs of the time. And to find an answer, they had to experiment. Some experimental methods included piercing abscesses to drain them, cauterizing abscesses for healing, applying herbs, applying manure, drinking the urine of the uninfected, pouring boiling water. Even some doctors believed that the disease arose when the soul of the dead left the body and haunted the living. Some proposed treatments were bathing in rosewater or pouring vinegar on oneself. Understandably, the above methods were not very effective. When medicine could not find an answer, people turned to the highest power to find an answer. Churches became a destination for patients seeking miracles. Some believed this was God's miracle, and people should not try to cure it, just accept and enjoy it. They didn't enjoy it for long. But this was also when the church was losing faith from the people because they focused too much on serving the upper class. Perhaps that's why the warnings from Pope Clement VI were ignored. He said the Jews were not to blame. In places without Jews, the disease still raged. But that did not stop the fanatics. Many fanatics blamed the Jews for the existence of the disease, thus escalating the conflict with the Jews. In Sweden and Germany, nearly 3,000 Jews were burned alive. Merchants boycotted the Jews and only traded with those against the Jews. Just in 2 years, 1348 and 1349, Jewish burning platforms opened up everywhere. Meanwhile, many believed that since this was God's punishment, they went on a pilgrimage to ask for forgiveness. They went and self-flagellated with whips, often naked everywhere. Whether they were forgiven or not is still to be studied, but what they created was a stronger spread of the disease wherever they went. Unable to find a cure, a miracle to save people from the epidemic combined with religious conflict made faith in the church scarcer than ever. When both medicine and faith failed to provide an answer, many blamed the stars. The Paris Medical Council, following the miasma theory, affirmed that the disease was the result of the conjunction between Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The conjunction of positions had polluted the air, and those who breathed in this miasma would get sick. From here, the cure would be to find a fresh place to breathe to cure the disease. Others went the opposite way and sought the foulest place to clear the lungs. From then on, public restrooms became more crowded than ever. And of course, this only increased the possibility of infection in the community. During the search for answers and treatment methods, humans unintentionally made the situation worse. Even the ongoing battles between nations, like the 100 Years' War between England and France, did not help. The number of deaths caused by this mysterious disease was truly terrifying, but the number of deaths caused by man-made disasters was not any less. Nearly 300 years after the last outbreak in Europe, it returned to London in 1665. Suddenly, people began experiencing symptoms such as vomiting, discolored limbs, giant boils, and oozing ulcers. In just 1 year, it claimed the lives of over 100,000 people out of the total population of 460,000 in the city. However, this was not the worst. 200 years later, the black spots reappeared in China, taking the lives of 12 million people from both mainland China and India. The estimated global death toll was over 15 million. Over time, the declining population reduced the chances of the disease spreading. Trade routes became deserted, contributing to stability. The Croatian authorities issued a 30-day port ban for newly arrived ships. This ban, called Trentino, was effective in preventing the spread of disease. Later, the ban was extended to 40 days and applied in places like Milan and Finland. The new name for the ban was Quarantino, meaning 40 days, which later became the more familiar term for humans in 2020, quarantine. Speaking of 2020, a funny fact is that what happened with the disease in the 14th century repeated itself in a more modern and developed society. Many still believed it was not a disease, some considered it fake news, and others believed they could overcome it on their own or by breathing on each other. Regardless, when the pandemic arrived, humans revealed their ugly faces. After years of development, spread, and taking countless lives, this mysterious disease with its horrifying ulcers was gradually pushed back by the advancements of science. But no one can forget the aftermath it left behind, how it destroyed an empire, changed the entire economic structure of many countries, and forced humans to expose their darkest sides. And to remember its dark nature and the physical manifestations on the bodies of the afflicted, we will forever remember it by its Danish translation, Den sorte død, or the Black Death. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the dark chapters of human history, specifically the Black Death. We would love to hear your thoughts on the Black Death, its impact, and its lingering legacy in today's world. Please leave your comments below and engage in a discussion with us and with other viewers. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel for more videos that delve into the fascinating, often haunting narratives of our past. We look forward to seeing you in our next video.